Finance's Jessica Smith is in Washington, D.C. with the details. Jessica, what are you seeing so far?
Well, the bottom line of this report is the special counsel did not conclude that the president committed a crime, but it also did not exonerate him. And Attorney General Bill Barr says there was not enough evidence to establish obstruction of justice. Here's what he had to say about Mueller's obstruction of justice findings in a press conference this morning.
As I addressed in my March 24th letter, the special counsel did not make a traditional prosecutorial judgment regarding this allegation. Instead, the report recounts 10 episodes involving the president and discusses potential legal theories for connecting those activities to the elements of an obstruction offense.
So some of those incidents that may have possibly been obstruction of justice were the firing of FBI Director Comey or telling Comey to drop the investigation into Michael Flynn, some of those high-profile incidents that we remember happening. This report also says that the president's efforts to influence the investigation were largely unsuccessful because the people around him did not listen to his directions and didn't follow his orders. Some of the examples were Comey did not in the investigation into Michael Flynn. The White House counsel did not ask for Special Counsel Robert Mueller to be removed. There were some really interesting tidbits about the president's reaction to Special Counsel Mueller being appointed. He said at the time, "This is the end of my presidency." He told Jeff Sessions, "You were supposed to protect me," according to notes of people who were there. The special counsel also says that one of the people they talked to said that Sessions carried a resignation letter in his pocket every time he went to the White House after summer of 2017 when the president was criticizing Sessions repeatedly. You'll remember he called him beleaguered on Twitter. Another interesting point is that the special counsel says the written answers from the president were inadequate and they wanted to interview the president, but they decided not to subpoena him because they weighed the benefits of that interview versus the delay that it would cause in this investigation. And finally, one more point I wanted to touch on here is remember that time when Sarah Sanders said that the rank and file FBI agents had lost faith in Comey. They had lost faith in him and that their morale was down, all of these things about the rank and file FBI. When talking about Comey being fired, she admitted to the special counsel that that was a slip of the tongue. And then she went on to say that another comment about that was made in the heat of the moment and not founded on anything. So what the Attorney General is saying here is that there is no collusion, there was no obstruction of justice or not enough evidence to establish obstruction of justice, but Democratic lawmakers aren't really buying that as they're reading through this report, and they want to hear from Mueller himself to see how he came to some of these conclusions and hear more about the parts that are redacted. They want to see the full report unredacted. We know that 2 committees so far on the House side have asked Robert Mueller to come in and testify before the end of May. So we'll see if that happens sometime soon.
All right, Jessica Smith bringing us some of the key points from the initial look at the filing. Thanks so much. Joining us now, though, for more is former federal prosecutor Randy Zelin. Randy, before we get into the actual the specifics of the report here, I just want to ask about kind of the general handling in seeing Attorney General William Barr come out and talk about how this is being presented. Is there any kind of feeling about that when he comes out and kind of frames this in the way that it's presented to the public?
My visceral reaction is one of disappointment. It would be like watching the series finale of Game of Thrones and finding out that the Night King is Kramer from Seinfeld. Talk about kicking the can down the road. Look, I always go to the last page of whatever it is that I need to know. When I was a kid, I would go to the last page of the book. So you go to the last page of the report, and what's telling about it, it's not what it says we did, it's what we didn't do. We didn't use typical and traditional prosecutorial judgment, which means we didn't make a judgment whether or not the president obstructed justice. What else does it tell us? That there are things that we would need to do. We haven't resolved questions of the president's intent, question of the president's actions. Again, what we didn't do as a prosecutor, you make those decisions. And, of course, what's most telling, we ain't saying you did it,
right?
But we ain't saying that you didn't. So come on.
I Well, I'm sorry to jump in over you, Zach, but I just had a quick question for you because I was reading it, and this is what was so interesting to me because he keeps saying collusion, 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 right? But at the beginning, they said, listen, I'm actually going to read it to you. They said, in evaluating whether evidence about collective action of multiple individuals constituted a crime, we applied the framework of conspiracy law, not the concept of collusion, which they said is not a specific offense or theory of liability, nor is it a term of art in federal criminal law. So how does that apply, or how does that change the lens in which, we hear the president's comments when he says, look, no collusion, no collusion. I didn't collude, complete exoneration. When the report says, listen, we didn't apply this framework of collusion, we were looking specifically for
I couldn't have said it any better myself. But if we're going to try to unpack it, and it gets a little complicated, first of all, and one of the nice things about what it is that goes on here is that the public has become so much more informed and so much more educated how our criminal justice system works. People know about cooperating and proffering, and probably could have a discussion about, do you need to have an underlying crime in order to obstruct justice? That has become a very, very hot button topic. And I think that's probably part of the analysis. But again, to me, it all comes down to we ain't going there. And it may very be simply a matter of, we're not going to indict him while he's sitting as president. So why in God's name are we going to behave like we're going to? Yeah. So I wonder how much that really impacts what's going on here. And in order to make it a non-political kind of thing, leave us all hanging with, I don't really know what to make of this report. Yeah. Kick the can down the road to Congress and let them figure it out.
Well, I mean, it's 448 pages we're talking about here, so one former federal prosecutor, not enough. I also want to bring in former State Department Attorney Darin Johnson, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Darin, I mean, when we're talking about what we're seeing here, did anything jump out to you? I mean, the mention of redacting things because of ongoing investigations, particularly interesting because we know that we're still trying to find out more, but was anything else of note in your mind?
Well, what actually jumped out at me is, despite the fact that Mueller failed to make a prosecutorial decision, the report states specifically, if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. And the report goes on to me, read like a roadmap for Congress on the factual and legal arguments that could lead to a determination of obstruction of justice. And so I think I agree with the former federal prosecutor there that I think the fact that Mueller was not likely to be able to indict the president under standing DOJ policy guidance really influenced the writing of this report. And they really wanted to kick the can to Congress and to lay out everything for Congress, lay out the facts that Congress could use in such a determination, and to also lay out the legal arguments.
Well, when we're talking about kind of the reaction to what we're seeing, I also want to bring in the president's reaction because, of course, that is key here. President Trump reacting to the release of the Mueller report this morning, tweeting this Game of Thrones inspired meme. The president also speaking out earlier today. Take a listen.
Good day, too. It was called No Collusion, No Obstruction. There never was, by the way, and there never will be. And we do have to get to the bottom of these things, I will say. But I say it in front of my friends, this should never happen to another president again. This hoax, this should never happen to another president again.
Also interesting of note, though, on page 290 of the Mueller report, it also indicated President Trump's reaction upon learning of the special counsel appointment. That was interesting just because essentially President Trump was saying that he was effed, for lack of a better way of presenting that. I mean, how do you guys pair that with kind of what we're seeing in that reaction and now what we're seeing with him saying no collusion, complete exoneration?
If I were advising the president from a public relations standpoint, what I would do today is I would talk about the unemployment rate. I would talk about the stock market. I would talk about the economy. I would talk about anything but this, because to get up there and say this is total exoneration, to borrow from a baseball analogy, if I go 0 for 5, I commit 3 errors, and we win a game 5-4 only because I had gotten hit by a pitch and took first base, I'm not getting up there saying I should be MVP of Major League Baseball. No, I'm just happy to get out of this thing alive. And for him to say we should really get to the bottom of this, what's the old saying? Don't wish too hard, because you actually might get what you want.
Yeah, and I don't know, based on what we're seeing, I don't know if it would be complete exoneration based on the way that this report reads. But Darin, just off that last point, real quick to wrap up here, I mean, what do you make of the way that this seems at odds, the way that the president was afraid of this, and now the findings are out, and seemingly embracing the findings?
Well, I think the president should be a little careful about what he says about the report, because the facts are pretty damning. When you read through the report and you actually look at what was taking place behind the scenes, directing the White House counsel to try to get the special counsel fired, attempting to limit the scope of the investigation. There are some facts in this report that are pretty damning. So I would be careful to laud it too much. But of course, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what actions Congress decides to take. And right now, getting an unredacted version of the report, taking further action will likely depend upon whether Congress decides to open an inquiry into impeachment, which we all know is very politically fraught.
All right, Darin Johnson, thanks for joining us from D.C. And Randy Zelin, our thanks to you as well.
Thank you.
Enjoy the Game of Thrones inspired and sports metaphors as well.